Welcome back to Cult Pop. I'm the host, Jim Hall. We've got a great one today, so I can't talk too long here. We've got a fan favorite and one of our favorites, John Scalzi. He's got a lot going on and a lot of future things coming up, so we wanted to catch up, and he's got an entire episode to tell us about everything that's going on. So stay tuned for Cult Pop.
They came from every corner of the country, from small towns and big cities. But they all shared one thing in common. They belonged to a family called Marines, a tough and determined few dedicated to protecting everything we hold sacred. And still, they come. Celebrate the 225-year history of those proud few who have earned the title Marine.
Welcome back to Cult Pop. I'm Jim Hall, and with me now is a wonderful friend of the show we've had on a few times now, and just always a great guest, and he's always got wonderful things going on. We're with John Scalzi, and John, thanks so much as always for being on the show.
Glad to be here.
John, you got a lot of stuff has been happening since last we talked. You've been nominated for many awards, different books coming out. Let's jump in and go anywhere you want. Zoe's Tales coming out. We've got some short stories coming out with Subterranean Press. And Subterranean Press has also got a full book coming out at the end of the year.
Yep.
So why don't we talk a little bit about Zoe's Tale, because we love that. I'm a huge fan of that universe. And then we'll talk later about all the books that are now out in paperback from that universe and others. Right. So let's go into right now, which will be coming out as people start to watch this video. Zoe's Tale will be hitting stores soon in the summer. And
sure, in the summer.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that novel?
Well, Zoe's Tale is it's a book that kind of follows directly on The Last Colony, which is the current novel in the Old Man's War universe, and also was, as you noted, just recently Hugo nominated. And in fact, not only does it follow on it, it's told in parallel time to that story. Now, if you've read The Last Colony, you'll know there's a character in there named Zoe, who is the daughter of John Perry and Jane Sagan, who are the main characters, and she has her own adventures, but they're not really detailed in The Last Colony. One of the things that she does, for example, is that she goes off-planet to do a diplomatic mission for her dad. And so when the book was done, people came back to me with that, and they said, well, that was great, but what was this thing about Zoe leaving and going off and coming back, and was there something there? Because if there was, we totally missed it. And the fact of the matter was, I had really no plans for it, but the more that people talked to me about that, I'm like, well, I guess maybe we should talk about where Zoe went and what she did, and so on and so forth. And so I started off thinking maybe I'll do a short story with this, talk about Zoe, but the more I thought about it, the more I was actually interested in Zoe, and also the more that she represented something of a writing challenge. Most of the characters that I'd written so far had been primarily men that were more or less around my age.
Sure.
I tried one from a female point of view, the novelette, the Sagan Diary.
Right.
But trying to channel a 16-year-old girl and to make it actually seem reasonable, that was actually would be a real writing challenge. So I had said at the end of The Last Colony and the afterward, I'm going to take a step back. But what I did was I ended up calling Tor and my editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, and saying, I kind of want to do this. Would you mind if I actually went ahead and bumped this up? And he's like, are you an idiot? Of course because it sells well, and they're very happy with that universe. So went ahead and wrote that up, and it was actually very much of a challenge, because once I said, well, I'm going to write from the point of view of a 16-year-old girl, having never been a 16-year-old girl, and when I was 16 years old, basically being clueless about 16-year-old
Sure.
girl. It actually presented far more of a challenge than I would have suspected. It was really difficult.
John, I remember a few times on your wonderful website you've posted a couple of paragraphs here or there, maybe half a chapter, and I think universally everybody said, what a great job you've done picking up this voice and writing that. So, but I can imagine it is a heck of a challenge.
Well, and part of the problem was that, again, because of having never been a 16-year-old girl, one of the things you need to be careful about is that you don't sound like 38-year-old man in 16-year-old girl drag, because that would be really bad. And the other thing about it is that you want to make a voice that's authentic, that doesn't sound like all the other characters that you've done. And I asked friends about this, and well, how do I do this? And a lot of my friends who were, male and also my age were notably unhelpful. They're just, well, go hang around with 16-year-old girls. I'm like, that's not.
Yeah, that's not safe for
not a good
a 30-some-year-old man. Sure.
Not something I need to be doing. And what I ended up doing is relying on my wife and a few other female friends to tell me when the voice sounded right. And I wrote the first chapter several times trying to get that voice right. And my wife was like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's all right. And then finally I got it right. And she actually stomps into the room with the papers going, this is her. I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm going to do. But it took a while to do that. And this is one of the things, this is the back end about the whole writing process, which you never see. When you see the book, it's done,
right.
The whole thing's complete. And you shouldn't care about the process. You shouldn't care how the book got made. You should just care about, is it a good story? But on the other end of things, we sit and we're like, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, this works. Now I've got to extend it. And so it was a real writing challenge. And the thing that I found actually is that once we nailed down what her voice was, right? Anytime I got lazy or anytime I got slow or just decided to deviate and just try to go through, it was as if I would all shut down. It was almost as if the character was like, no, I don't go there. That's not what I do. And it was very frustrating. She was the least complacent of my characters to write. Now, I don't want to make it sound like she became this character in my head and I need medication. But I mean, in the sense of you get a sense of who your characters are and what's appropriate for them to do and what's not appropriate for them to do. And whenever I started doing something with her or some of the other characters that I built that seemed inappropriate for what they should be doing, then the writing became really hard and I had to backtrack back and forth. The result of it, though, is that I'm actually extremely proud of the character. I think she's written very well. And I think it will be very interesting for the readers in this universe because it really is, the reason it's called Zoe's Tale is that it really is her story. It's set to the backdrop of everything else that's going on. And in that sort of sense, those people who've read the Old Man's War universe will get a payoff there. But for new readers, you can just drop in and go with her telling of how this is
Excellent.
How the universe exploring that universe.
And a lot of those, the books do stand alone, each and every one,
right.
Which I really like. I'd like to go back because you mentioned about the process and not everybody's interested. I actually always have been interested in the process as somebody that just can't fathom how you can write 2 or 3 novels, be working on 2 or 3 novels, do your blogs that you do and be constantly on that. That's always really impressed me. But going back to this novel, was the editing process a little more difficult? Did it take longer to complete this novel because of the different voice? Yes,
I mean it certainly did. I mean, because again, the issue of well, 2 things happened. One was because of the voice. You want to make sure that the voice was consistent. And also, she evolves through the course of the book. She starts off as basically a happy-go-lucky teenager who is one of those teenagers who is smarter and cleverer than, she's just very facile. And over the course of the book, she's presented with challenge after challenge after challenge. And so her worldview has to change and evolve. And so, whereas a lot of the other characters that I've done, they are who they are. But 16-year-old girls, if you've ever known 16-year-old girls, they evolve over the course of a year or over the course of time. They're still who they are, but their experiences change them.
Sure.
And you have to, and in this particular case, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the book. And so you had to be careful to capture that, So just the mechanics of building this evolving character made it a much more difficult thing to do. The other mechanical issue in terms of the writing was, here was this book that was told in parallel time to The Last Colony. And when I presented it to my editor, I was like, oh, this will be fine. I mean, I know where all the story beats are. It'll be, but as it turns out, it's a really, really logistical nightmare. Because what you want to be, if you're lazy, all you do is you tell the story again from a different point of view. If you are smart, and I hope I was smart, what you do is you tell a story that happens in the same time frame, has a couple of points where it intersects the other story that you've done, but is its own story. That you don't have to have read The Last Colony or the rest of them to understand what's going on, or that if you have read The Last Colony, you don't feel like, oh, geez, I've already read this story.
Right.
Why did I spend $25 on a book that I've already read?
Right.
And I thought it would be easy because apparently I'm stupid. And what I found out is that it's actually extremely difficult to write a story in parallel time, have it be a new story,
and not step on anything from the old story.
Right, and have this character who evolves over the course of the book. And basically, I went into it going, oh, it'll be 3 months, and I'll write it, and it'll be done, and it'll be easy. And as my wife will be happy to tell you, it was not easy or simple along, and there was points where I was just pulling out my hair going, I need to strangle myself.
Well, John, I'm a huge fan of the Old Man's War universe. As you know, we've had John before and talked about it. And you've just got to be so pleased that originally a novel that you posted online has now led to first 3, then 4 other novels, plus Questions for a Soldier, a small novella,
Right.
and The Sagan Diary,
Right.
another novella. You know, how is that okay, one story and then the genesis of all this, and I'm sure you've got more stories in your head up there.
Since my editor might be watching, why yes I do. It's been gratifying, of course. I mean, the story I wrote originally, Old Man's War, I wrote, you know, you have no idea what's going to happen with it. I wrote it, you know, and then hopefully to sell it, but once I got to the point of wanting to sell it, I was like, I'll just put it up online instead. Even when it was sold, there was no assurance that there would be any sort of follow-on, that anybody would have any sort of interest in it. It could have just sunk below the waves. And to have that continuing interest and to have, you know, the energy that people are saying, yes, tell us more about the story. I mean, that's another reason, like I said, for the Zoe's Tale was people like, we want to hear more about this universe. Could you tell us Zoe's story? What's going on with Zoe? That seems like the place to go. And like I said, the more I thought about it, I was like, well, yes, maybe so. I actually do rely on my readers quite a lot for the feedback. You know, they want to learn more about the universe. Now, to be sure, it's not just all request week. You know, it's like, tell us more about this. Well, some things they want to know, I don't want to say. Some things they want to know, I don't know. You know, people are like, well, what about this particular weapon and how does it work and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, you've thought about this
way too much,
far
sure.
more than I have.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, if the interest is there, it can be a lot of fun. Now, whenever you have a series, you have to be careful because you have to weigh the thing of giving people what they want versus just doing the same thing over and over. You need to be very careful. One of the reasons after The Last Colony that I said I'm going to step away was because I was like, I don't know where else to go with this universe right now, and I'm going to spend some time doing something else and maybe come back to it. Now, as it happened, the amount of interval was a lot shorter than I thought it was. But it could have just possibly been the same thing where I could have just said, well, I'll come back to it in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. Let that universe deepen in my brain and come up with some new stories. And it's possible after Zoe's Tale I may do that again.
Sure.
It may be that I write short stories in the universe. It may be that I focus on completely new characters or fast forward 80 years in the future. The point of it is that whatever you do, it's essential that you, as the author, don't get bored with your own universe, because if you get bored with your own universe, then everybody else is going to know about it, and then the readers will go, well, it was a good series up until about, you know, the 4th book, and then you can tell he started phoning it in. I don't mind if people don't like my books, you know, because that's totally fair. You know, what I would mind is if people felt that I was doing the books just to generate another, you know.
Sure, another payday.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be the difficult thing for me. I mean, certainly I do them for the payday because, you know, yeah, I have a mortgage and a child who will one day want to go to college. But at the same time, I want to continue to be interested in my universe. And if I'm not interested in my universe, I'm not gonna force it. I'm not gonna just write another story there to write another story. I'm gonna do it so that it's an experience that people have not yet had in that universe, even though they're becoming increasingly familiar with the contours of the place. Well,
something you do, John, that in the past, and when I say the past 70s, 80s, early 90s, authors didn't seem to do, you don't pigeonhole yourself. It's not The Sagan Diaries, Volume 1, Volume 2. Each novel is a wonderful standalone novel that can get a reader interested from book 3 to say, I'd like to go back and read the past history, or follow from, you don't need to follow book 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
or novellas, and I think you do yourself a real favor doing
Yeah,
that.
I think so too, and it's partly just my own behavior as a reader. I hate finding these books that look really interesting, great cover art, really interesting story, and you find out that it's book 2, and you sort of feel like, do I need to have read everything else? What I need to do just to make myself happy as a reader is make sure that no matter where you come in the Old Man's War universe, there are going to be stories before, there's going to be stories after, but this story is its own thing. Even if you've not read everything else, you're going to get a ride with this story that is going to be a lot of fun. And the other thing about it is also just how the books fit all together. You know, the first 3 books constitute their own trilogy because it's the story arc of John Perry and Jane Sagan, right? However, you could also say with Zoe's Tale, which is coming out, that they break into 2 sets of 2. The first 2, Old Man's War and The Ghost Brigades, could be books that are about war, whereas Last Colony and Zoe's Tale are stories about colonization, about settlement, about the civilian life. So they fit in those sorts of ways. Alternately, you know, Zoe's Tale, again, complete standalone. And maybe if that one's successful, we'll do another story with Zoe. I mean, I shouldn't say anything about this now, but we're all friends here, so I can tell you this. I already have the first scene of a second Zoe book in my head. And so if you know, Tor comes back to me and says, could you do another book with Zoe? I was like, well, maybe. You know, I will be ready to go with that. But in the sense of there are lots of opportunities to do that. And these are opportunities that you have only if you do it as standalone series, because you give yourself the option of saying, now we're going to move over here and we're going to find something that goes on over here. We're going to come back over here, and no matter what, people who read the series know that wherever they come in, that they're still going to get a kick. They're still going to get enjoyment out of it. They're not going to have to worry about whether or not they've read the last 3 or 4 books in the sequence. And that's really important to me.
Well, I absolutely love the books. I recommend the Old Man's War universe to all my friends who haven't read those books. And folks at home, I recommend to you, all the early books are now out in paperback. And go to Barnes & Noble, go to Borders, go to Amazon, wherever you buy your books. Go and pick one of them up, see what you like, and you're really going to enjoy it. I want to switch gears now and talk about something. We don't talk enough about some of your nonfiction stuff. That last year, I actually got to read the first one. You were doing the book tour for one of the novels. Melissa and I came out to see you, and the Rough Guide series.
Yeah.
You've got the Rough Guides. And what a lot of fun, though. I read the sci-fi one.
Yeah.
And what a lot of fun just a cool book that is.
It was fun.
And you do a whole series of that stuff, and we've never really talked about any of that on the show. So
the Rough Guide books, I have 3 books in that that I've done that are Rough Guides books, and they were all a lot of fun to write. The very first book I ever did was the Rough Guide to Money Online, and it was a financial book about, you know, how to manage your money and do all that sort of stuff. And I remember getting it, and the Rough Guides people, the publishers, had a tremendously successful internet book, you know, Rough Guide to the Internet, and it sold like 1 million copies. So they're like, Rough Guide to Money Online, we'll sell 100,000 of those in a walk, right? So they signed me to do it, and that year was 1999. By the time it came out, it was going to come out in November of 2000. So they said, we will put you on a book tour, and we're going to put you on the book tour the week after the presidential elections, because it'll be an empty news week and nothing will have happened. Well, 2 things happened between when I signed the contract and when the book came out. The first was the internet bubble collapsed, and so people were like, increasingly, I'm not putting any of my money online. And the second thing that happened was, apparently, if you recall the 2000 election, there was a bit of a hang-up about the resolution of the actual election. So I went on this tour. It was originally like a 5 or 6 city tour, and I got as far. When I went to New York and I went to Chicago, and after that, they were like, everywhere we went, they were like, we don't have time for you. We've got all this other stuff that we're doing. And so after the Chicago one, they was like, you know, we're just going to send you home. And you know, and that book collapsed, and it was just terrible. But they liked it, and which was enough for them to authorize the book, which is The Rough Guide to the Universe, which is my astronomy book, which actually came out in a second edition May. And that was actually a life goal. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Carl Sagan. And then I found out I couldn't do math. You know, the whole
makes it hard.
Quadratic equation was about as far as I got, and everything else from there's just like, I see these symbols, I have no idea what this means. But I'm competent enough with it to do a real basic of this is what the universe is like. And so I got to do that. That was a real life goal, so that was very exciting for me. And then prior to all this freelance stuff, I had been a full-time movie critic for newspapers and magazines. So I did a book on science fiction film, and which was great because I'd be sitting there at home putting like DVDs of Flash Gordon serials in there, just giggling, going, I'm getting paid for this. This is my job.
Yes, I'm very envious of that book because I do a similar type show with old public domain horror movies and sci-fi movies, and I just love that going through it. Oh, this is a great resource for me.
It's fun. It's a book that we have in the book. We have the canon of the 50 science fiction films, and it's meant for people to argue. It's like, how could you put this book or this movie in here and not put this movie in here? And it's like, you're clearly an idiot, And this is why we prefaced it going, these are the ones I think are significant. It doesn't mean like the best, doesn't mean the most successful, but significant. And if you disagree, good. This is the way it should be. So all of those have done very well. Like I said, the second edition of the astronomy book's coming, and then with Subterranean, we did the writing book, which was you're not fooling anyone when you take your laptop in a coffee shop. And then later on this year, a 10-year retrospective of my website.
Which I think is going to be great. I think that's going to be really neat.
Called Your Hate Mail Will Be Graded. And I'm actually very excited about that too, because it's mind-blowing to me that I've actually been writing on my personal website, the blog, before we even had the word blog. And second of all, for 10 years. It's actually the longest writing gig I've ever had. And so the idea to collapse it into one book is kind of fun.
Well, John, you've given me the perfect transition because I always like talking about your website. And what a wonderful thing. Even 10, 15 years ago, I'm still a newspaper reader. I love my blogs and all that. But everybody, if you're a newspaper reader, has their favorite columnists and stuff like that. Well, now as the internet develops, you have your favorite people that you have to stop. And we've gotten to know each other because I got to know the internet. And so many fans get to know you, and to the point, you get 20, 30,000 people checking in a day to see what you're writing about. And to make that into a book, I mean, there's a lot of times it's just a lot of fun, and that's great. Sometimes there's some real thought-provoking stuff. You've got your story about the growing up poor thing, that is an original Lincoln. I can't imagine, you must have probably had hundreds of thousands of hits to that.
Yeah, and that actually jumped into newspapers too. It got into the Chicago Tribune and the Dayton Daily News and stuff like that. It is interesting because among other things, you don't know what things you're going to write that are necessarily going to just have people off. I mean, I wrote the being poor thing to get attention because I had a point I tried to make. But there are other times where I've written something like, I'm sitting there typing and going, I think this is important, and I think people will pick it up. And it just completely sinks below the way. People are like, yeah, whatever. Or other times, just this last week, I had the internet turned on me last week.
I know what you're
and I don't know what it was. There's something in the water, but something happened, and I aggravated a whole bunch of people. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do something that's just going to be completely silly and no one would ever argue with me about. And there's the word all right, and functionally it's supposed to be two words, ALL dash, all right, as two words as opposed to all right, one word. And so I said, this is my grammar complaint of the month. All right, two words. And anyone who thinks otherwise is a hamster poker, poke the rodents and stuff. And I thought it was funny. I thought, people would sit there and go, yes or no, and they would just have fun with it. And some people got
really
furious with me. I'm like, you're a grammatical prescriptivist, and that means you're on the side of the fascists. And I'm like, where do you go? And it was just so frustrating for me. It was just like, I'm trying to make a joke here, people. But this is the point, which is you never know what it is about that you're going to write, which is necessarily going to just get people riled up. Ironically, before I started writing on the web, I had a newspaper column, back when I was 24. And they were about as good as you would think a newspaper column from a 24-year-old would be, right? But sometimes I would write something.
You've been brave enough to post some of those early columns.
Oh boy, yeah. It's like, well, because one of the things that you do have to combat is if people think that you write well now, they make the assumption that you've always written well and that you were, that genuine talent.
It's not a work in progress.
It's not a work in progress. And one of the things that I'm absolutely unafraid to remind people is, no, it is a process. Back when I posted stuff from when I was 17 years old, which, is painful. I posted stuff from when I was 24 years old that is technically competent, but is just kind of lifeless.
Right.
And to say to people, you keep developing, you keep growing. And, I'm 38 years old now, soon to be 39. And I hope that when I'm 50, I look back at the stuff I wrote when I was 38, and I was like, well, it's good, but look how much more I've improved. But even back then, there'd be something I thought was great, and we'd get a huge response, and it again would sink below the waves. Or there'd be other times where I read something that I thought was completely tossed off, and my editor would go, "That really worked." And sometimes and sometimes you don't. It's the great thing about the internet and the great thing about the web is that you do have such a dialogue with people. Sometimes, like I said last week, it can be really aggravating because it's like I just want you all to appreciate the joke.
Right.
But other times it can be useful and it can even be sustaining.
Well, sometimes sarcasm over the internet, like you get, or sometimes you even find yourself, okay, is it sarcastic? Is it not?
Yeah.
But I was going to mention the fact that sometimes some of the most, to me, you're making a blasé or a flippant, funny comment.
Right.
Nothing more than that. Not
Right.
generated to do anything more. And sometimes it'll create a life of its own. Or in regards to that, of course, going back to the cat thing, the cat with the bacon thing.
Bacon
there
cat.
was just some, and who would have ever thought, if you'd have thought to yourself, I want to do something to get hundreds of thousands of hits, that I'm sure that wouldn't have been originally what you would have done.
Right, exactly.
And it's just amazing.
Yeah, the internets are funny that way. You never do know what is going to set people off. If you try to design it so that you are going to set the internets off, then you are basically setting yourself up for failure. The reason I put bacon on the cat was because people were like, "You won't do that. You said you would, but you won't." And all it was just to to cheese off like 5 readers. Go, "Ha! See, I did put bacon on my cat," and everyone just went completely nuts for it.
Well, that was a lot of fun on the internet for about 2 weeks. That was going that went. You had the whole U.S. sending crazy stuff
I will tell
out.
you what the side effect of that is, which is vaguely amusing and vaguely it's like, okay, I get the joke already. Anytime anything involving bacon
or cats.
bacon that happens on the internet, it's like, do you know about the bacon scarf or the bacon wallet
Right.
or the bacon candy or the bacon this or the bacon that, Lego bacon, I immediately
Yes,
get
I've got 8,000 posts today on it. Thank
and
you.
I always have to post. It's like, yes, I know about this specific bacon-related event on the internet, and I love bacon. I'm not like married to
Right,
it.
right. It's not your
It's
the
not my
only
life
thing,
passion.
your holy
It's
grail.
really yeah, exactly.
Well, John, time goes by with you incredibly quick. We love having you on. We'll have you on again with your next stuff. We've posted your website throughout the show. Folks at home, I really recommend you take the time. Go see John's stuff. It should be a daily stop. If you're a person that's on the computer, stop at John's website. It's a lot of fun. It'll put a smile on your face and sometimes really make you think, and it'll keep you up to date on all things Scalzi. But
Great.
John, always a pleasure. I really enjoy having you on.
Great.
Your books are just a thrill for me to read, and I know for the folks at home. It's really a pleasure to become friendly with you, but also have an author just that when you have a book coming out, I know it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be something I want to read.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Continued success to you.
Thanks.
Folks at home, we've just been thrilled to have John Scalzi on again. I can't speak highly enough about the man. Great books, wonderful stuff, an incredible wife, gorgeous and friendly, friend of ours also, so we say hi to her. And we just recommend visit his website, and we also recommend, if you've got any questions, you missed something on the show, you can always go back to our website, www.cult-pop.com. You can rewatch this episode or many of our past episodes. We thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
In our pasteurized and sanitized world, we are crying out for something real, something like Detroit, where we are brought alive by the reds, greens, silvers, and blues. So when you need to feel something again, come on down to Detroit, because the thrill of a real city is pure Michigan. Your trip begins at michigan.org.
Well, that finishes up another great Cult Pop. If you missed anything, just go to our website, www.cult-pop.com. You can rewatch the episode or link on to any of the authors. Also, a lot of people have missed the RSS feed. Click onto that and you'll be notified anytime we've got a new show. We thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.